We'd like to introduce now Dr. Paulo Kadri. Dr. Paulo will talk for us about microsurgical anatomy of white matters, as well known by everybody. Dr. Paulo is one of the greatest anatomists of white white fibers. And with no further ado, we can start. Paulo, please take action.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'd like to really thank you, the organizers, Borba, Luis, Álvaro, Soriano. So it was really a pleasure. It is just such an opportunity to see friends all over the world. I just saw here in the chat friends from Istanbul, Dr. Volkan, from Syria, from the United States, from everywhere. So thank you so much. So I'll really try to keep on my time. So I even have my clock by my side here. I hope you can see my screen. Is it okay?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the organization of the brain, internal organization of the brain. I could not let without take a little time and just say how thankful I am to my mentors and friends all over these years. Every time that we go to such a subject, we try to at least focus a little bit on the history of the development of this technique and this knowledge. But in our case here, just half an hour, we won't have enough to talk about that. But one thing that I do want to talk about is the one that didactically project or didactically organize all the subject, and we still use his classification that was Minard. And Minard divided the white matter of the brain, the fibers of the brain, in two main kinds, the association and the projection fibers. Another important point is that Professor Yashergil learned directly this technique to one of the main names on the brain anatomy from the beginning of the last century, that was Klinger. And he used to say that he applied all of this technique in all of his cases. This technique was revitalized by Professor Ture, and I had the opportunity with other fellows to know this technique during my fellowship. As you know, nobody was really care about this until the development of the tractography. Then we did need to have the anatomical substract to understand what the image, the MR, could show us. And in this way, extrapolated what we saw and understand the reconstruction of the different algorithms of the MR, the DSI and DTI. So coming back to the organization, we can divide the fibers in association and projection. Association fibers are the ones that are restricted to the telencephalon. They can be within the same hemisphere, then that what we call intrahemispheric or simple association fibers. And they can be between both hemispheres. That's what we call interhemispheric or commissural fibers. And of course, the projection fibers are the ones that project outside the telencephalon towards the diencephalon, brainstem, and spinal cord. The interhemispheric fibers, we can further divide them in short and long association fibers. The short association fibers are also called arcuate, intergyral, U fibers, or Minard. And that is a special component of these fibers that we're going to see related to the insula that we call extreme capsule. So the first layer of fibers that we see are the so-called U fibers or intergyral fibers. So they are the ones just underneath the cortex. We call them U fibers because they associate one gyro towards the other through the bottom of the sulci, resemble the letter U. Here we can easily see the communication of the one gyro towards the other gyro, the adjacent gyros. So resembling the letter U. Now, if we focus over the insula, as Professor Matias already told us, and we remove the cortex of the insula, we're going to see the same U fibers connecting the long and short gyres of the insula, but also the insular gyri with the opercula. And this is the so-called extreme capsule. Once we remove the extreme capsule, we're going to see the claustrum, and then we can notice that the claustrum is actually more dense over the central portion of the insula, mainly towards the apex of the insula. And then we can also see the next layer of fibers within the insular lobe, that is the external capsule. And with this we call external capsule because this is external to the lentiform gyrus. External capsule that has a ventral portion and a dorsal portion that we're going to see later on. So we saw the short gyrus. Now we're going to see the short gyrinal, the long association fibers of the brain. The long association fibers are on the lateral surface, the superior longitudinal fascicle, the occipital-frontal fascicle, and the uncinate fascicle. On the inferior surface, inferobasal surface, we have the inferior longitudinal fascicle. And within the limbic lobe, we have the long association fibers of the limbic lobe, the cingulate. So the superior longitudinal fascicle is the largest fascicle association fascicle of the lateral surface of the brain, connecting the frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe outside the limits of the insula. So it respects the anterior, superior, and inferior peninsular sulcus. Superior longitudinal fascicle, we can further divide in several segments. But for our purpose here, usually we just divide it as a horizontal, a vertical, and the very deep fibers turning around the most posterior portion of the insula, of the sylvian fissure, the arcuate portion. As you see, we can see the shadow of the insula, as well as protruding in the middle of this triangle, the shadow of the deeper structure, the putamen, deeper to the claustrum. Covering the putamen, here we have the external capsule. At the level of the lumen of insula, we're going to face the other two long association fibers on the lateral surface of the brain. And this will be the uncinate and the occipital-frontal fascicle. See that I only relate, or I only name it occipital-frontal fascicle, because there is no superior frontal occipital, as people say. So that's why also we're not going to call this inferior frontal occipital. Actually, the anatomical name, the proper anatomical name is occipital, because first the information comes towards the occipital lobe, and then through the occipital lobe, it might spread towards the frontal. So this, the correct anatomical name is occipital-frontal fascicle, passing through the lumen insula. Also passing through the lumen insula, we have the uncinate. So they both originate on the frontal orbital or frontal basal area. They condensate, they condense toward the lumen insula, and then they fan out towards the temporal anterior portion, we call uncinate, and posterior portion of the temporal, occipital, and inferior portion of the parietal. So we refer this as the occipital-frontal fascicle. At this level, both fascicles cannot be really separated. And at this level, both of them are forming the part that we call as the ventral portion of the internal capsule. Here within the inferior surface, temporo-occipital surface, we have within the depth of the fusiform, inferior temporal and inferior occipital, a very subtle fascicle, but that connects visual areas with the limbic areas. This is referred as the inferior longitudinal fascicle. Inferior longitudinal fascicle. Now, if we see the limbic lobe formed by the cingulate gyrus that condense, that diminish the size posterior to the splenium, and we call isthmus, join with the anterior portion of the lingual gyrus, anterior lingual gyrus, to form the parahippocampal gyrus, as the Matthias told us. If we remove the cortex, different than what we see on the lateral surface, where the U fiber system is very, very well developed, on the medial surface, within the limbic lobe, this is not so developed. So we're going to face the cingulum. Cingulum that we can further divide in a superior segment from the subcallosal area towards the subparietal area, and an inferior segment that receive fibers from the subparietal area, from the lingual gyrus, and from the superior segment to form the intrinsic white matter of the parahippocampal gyrus, so inferior segment of the cingulum. If we see in this dissection and we remove the inferior segment of the cingulum, we're going to face the hippocampal formation from its inferior aspect. We're going to enter the ventricle through the collateral eminence, through the collateral sulcus. And lateral to the collateral sulcus, we're going to identify here the inferior longitudinal fascicle. Now, the other association fibers connecting one hemisphere to the others are the commissural fibers. Commissural fibers will have mainly three fiber systems, which are the corpus callosum, the anterior commissure, and the hippocampal commissure. Corpus callosum is the largest of them. And the better definition that we saw is from Professor Ribas. It's like a butterfly baffling the windows. It spreads everywhere. Corpus callosum is very difficult to follow once we remove the medial component of the brain. But we can further follow these fibers, but we do have to imagine that there is a large, it's a very dense interlocking with the projection fibers as well as with the association fibers. But at 2 points, we can further follow the corpus callosum. At the level of the genu, where it spreads like a fork, so that's why we refer it to the forceps minor. And at the level of the splenius of the corpus callosum, where it spreads like also a fork, but has more components of fibers, so we name it as forceps major. At the level of the splenium of the corpus callosum, if we further dissect and go deeper towards these fibers, we're going to see that the deepest fibers will change the direction. Instead of coming posterior, they'll change the direction and go anterior. And this is going to be the deepest fiber system that covers the lateral surface of the ventricular system, just superficial to the ependyma. So this is called the tapetum. Tapetum that covers just underneath the ependyma, all the atrium and temporal horn. Those fibers emanate from the deepest portion of the splenium of the corpus callosum. Here we can see superficial fibers of the splenium, forceps major, deep fibers of the splenium, tapetum. So we used to say that the corpus callosum connects all parts of the brain with the exception of the temporal lobe. But we can see that the tapetum will also reach even the most anterior portions of the temporal lobe. The other commissural fibers that we have is the anterior commissure. Anterior commissure that has a ventricular portion at the most anterior and superior portion of the third ventricle, a compact portion passing through the deep nuclei of the brain, passing through the striatum, and divide the striatum in a ventral portion and in a dorsal portion. Then it's gonna pass over the amygdala. See here the amygdala on the most anterior portion of the temporal horn, the made in the anterior wall and the roof of the temporal horn. And then the anterior commissure is going to spread over the temporal horn as the lateral extension of the anterior commissure. The anterior commissure make its way through the striatum. So here we can see the tapetum, or the putamen, and the continuation of the putamen towards the nucleo accumbens to join on the medial surface the caudate nucleus. And then we can see here the fibers of the anterior commissure spreading over the temporal horn. Here we can see the continuum of the tapetum, the basal forebrain, or what we call the substantia inanimata, where we have the nucleo accumbens, and then coming towards the ventricle, where it's going to join the head of the caudate. If we further remove the striatum on the lateral surface, we can identify the anterior commissure that has a small portion that goes towards the olfactory region, so it's also called olfactory commissure. And here we can see that the anterior commissure is deeply related to the unciform and occipitofrontal fascicle. If I further remove the anterior commissure, now I can see the amygdala, and then I'm going to face the fibers, the projection fibers within the temporal horn. I'm going to face the turning of these fibers towards the internal capsule. I'm going to face what we call the inferior thalamic peduncle. Within these fibers, we have the optic radiation. So, anterior commissure, making an impression and divide striatum from the ventral striatum, dorsal striatum. Anterior commissure that resembles a brindle of a bicycle. Here, where it passes and make an impression within the globus pallidus. This is the so-called graciole channel. And then here we can see anterior commissure cutted with the graciole channel. The other commissure that we have is the hippocampal commissure or dorsal limbic commissure. Very quick, here we have isolate parahippocampal gyrus with the two main structures of the limbic system. Here we have the amygdala and the hippocampal formation. Hippocampal formation that's covered by its axons protruding inside the ventricle as the hippocampal eminence, and the axons cover it, it's the alveolus because it's very wide. These axons will converge to form the first portion of the fornix, the fimbria. The fimbria will further form the body, the crura of the fornix. When it gets together, the body of the fornix, and then it separates to form anterior wall and roof of the foramen of Monro, and will dive on the lateral ventricle towards the mammillary body. At the level of the crura, we have few fibers connecting each other. So at this level, we have the so-called hippocampal commissure. So here we see the crura, the body, the column, foramen of Monro, the fimbria, separating the fornix from the thalamus. What we have? We have the choroidal fissure. So at the level of the commissure of the crura of the fornix, we have the dorsal hippocampal commissure. Finally, we're going to go towards the projection fibers of the brain. Projection fibers are the fibers that will leave the telencephalon towards the diencephalon, brainstem, and the spinal cord. There is no direct connection of the telencephalon with the cerebellum. There is always a relay of these fibers. So, here we have a resume of the lateral surface. U fibers, short association fibers. Then we have the long association fibers of the superior longitudinal fascicle. If we focus here towards the insular region, we remove the insular cortex. Now we can see extreme capsule, then claustrum, external capsule. If I remove the external capsule, I'm going to face the putamen. If I remove the putamen, I'm gonna see on the most medial surface the globus pallidus, and I'm observing the continuation of the projection fibers that form the corona radiata with the internal capsule. Here I removed everything. I still leave here anterior commissure, but now we can see corona radiata, impression of the insula within the corona radiata, impression of the putamen. So this is the limit of the corona radiata in the internal capsule. Internal capsule that has a lot of holes, a lot of connections of the putamen with the caudate medially. We know that putamen and caudate will form together the striatum. Striatum is the continuation of both gray matters of the putamen and caudate through these holes of the internal capsule that are so-called lenticulo-gray matter, lenticulo-striatal gray matter. And here you have the globus pallidus. Now, if I further remove or further give a zoom of this, I can see the holes of the internal capsule. Continuation here of the corona radiata within the internal capsule. I can see the continuation of the gray matter of the putamen with the caudate medially. Here I can see globus pallidus, and I can see here anterior commissure passing on the most ventral and anterior portion of the globus pallidus to divide the dorsal and the ventral striatum. This picture we already saw. I cut the anterior commissure. I can see the superior surface at the middle, and I can see the projection fibers within temporal lobe. Now, if I remove the anterior commissure, I can see now corona radiata in its roll extension and the internal capsule. Corona radiata that I can divide in anterior, superior, posterior, and inferior portion. Limit of the internal capsule and the peduncle on the external, on the brain surface, is the tractus opticus. So if I remove the tractus opticus, here I can see corona radiata, internal capsule, and peduncle, crura of the mesencephalic peduncle. Here I have a zoom. Here is the channel or canal of Gratiolet, which I can see on the medial surface protruding in the third ventricle. Corona radiata, internal capsule, limit of the internal capsule with the peduncle. As you know, the peduncle, the most medial portion, frontopontine. The most lateral portion, parietal, occipital, temporal pontine. And within the middle, the third, the 3/5 in the middle, I have the spinal or corticospinal tract, which fibers will pass through the pons. And here we can see better. See, these fibers of the corticospinal tract will pass through the pons within or between the transverse fibers of the middle cerebellar peduncle to go towards the medulla and form the pyramid, which now we can see the internal the whole extension of the projection fibers, the corona radiata, the internal capsule, the peduncle fibers, fibers of the frontopontine, parietal, occipital, and temporal pontine will relay over the pons within the internal nuclei of the pons, and the corticospinal tract will condense to form the pyramid on the surface of the medulla oblongata, and then will finally decussate towards the spinal cord. On the medial surface, to expose these fibers, we do have to remove the caudate. So caudate that turns around the thalamus. If we remove the caudate, we're gonna face the projection fibers that, different from the lateral surface that go towards the brainstem and spinal cord. These fibers will go towards the thalamus. So once I remove the caudate, I see the internal capsule from its medial surface. And those are the thalamic peduncles, superior thalamic peduncles, anterior thalamic peduncles, with the characteristic turn of the most posterior part that was confused with what we used to call superior occipitofrontal fascicle. Then we have superior thalamic, posterior thalamic peduncle. And then notice that posterior thalamic peduncle, most of its fibers had its origin on the pulvinar of the thalamus. Some of these fibers will have its origin over the lateral geniculate body. We used to call all of these as optic radiation. Of course, optic radiation is located within these fibers, but the majority of these fibers are coming from the pulvinar. And then we have also inferior thalamic peduncle. Posterior thalamic peduncle with the characteristic turn, the so-called Myers loop that is associated mainly with the optic radiation. So this is what I would like to say. I know because of the time, I don't want to pass the time. We will have some case to further show, but that's not the objective of our lecture. And I do not want to advance in our time. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'll be ready for the discussion later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. That was a very good lecture. And Dr. Paulo, I'd like you to introduce Dr. Wolfberg for us, please, for the next lecture.
Yes. Hello, Stefan.
Hi, hello, Paulo. Can you hear me?
Yes. So it's my pleasure to introduce my dear friend, Stefan Wolfberg. Professor Wolfberg is from Vienna, University of Vienna, Department of Neurosurgery. He's one of the enthusiastic of the tractography and use of this anatomical lodgement together with the technology of the image to plan a safer surgery, especially talking about the intrinsic lesions of the brain. I have the pleasure to know and follow the work of Professor Wolfberg, and I'm pretty sure that he will